The rule of law and the tenets of the Constitution must be held up as an anvil of justice. Many hundreds of insurrectionists must be held to account. It will be slow, politically distasteful, and people may lose their lives. To quote the immortal words of Jeanette Vasquez, whatever you're going to do, you better do it fast before these insurrectionists launch a full-blown, nationwide, white supremacist insurgency. Thank you all for listening to my remarks.
Thank you so much. Could not have received any better information at this time. Again, I am going to say not only to our witnesses, but to all those looking, the timing could not have been better. We are on the United States House floor giving our testimony and debate to the impeachment. Therefore, some of our members will be called away, such as our chairman, Hakeem Jeffries. We will insert him during the 1 minute time or when he returns. I will now read off the next few individuals to save time. Unfortunately, we are going to have to stick to the 5-minute rule. I've been advised by our operators that I will tap at 30 seconds and you will be muted at 5 seconds. Only because we are part of history and we want this recorded before the vote. At this time, no stranger to the fight, no stranger to standing up for our power, our message than Elisa Garza, our good friend in CBC, co-founder of Black Lives Matter. She will be followed by the Honorable Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who has been speaking about our power, our message, followed by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, our power, our message, and rounded out by our very own Chair of Homeland Security, Congressman Benny Thompson. Back to you, my good friend, Alicia Garza.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair Beatty, for inviting my testimony today. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this incredible and important and timely hearing. My name is Alicia Garza. I'm the principal at the Black to the Future Action Fund, an organization that works to make Black communities powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. I am also one of the creators of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, which is now BLM Grassroots. My comments today represent the views of the Black to the Future Action Fund only. Honorable members of this committee, the insurrection at the United States Capitol building this week laid bare what too many of us have been warning about for years, that white supremacy is not only bad for America's health, and yet it is too often the engine that drives the rules that organize our lives. White supremacy and white nationalism is fueled by an anger at the power that Black communities build and wield, especially when it comes to elections. The president and his followers intend to invalidate the results of the last 2 elections, which is a blatant attempt to neutralize the power of Black voters to change the rules that have been rigged against our communities for generations. As we saw last week in their attempts to attack the government, they will stop at nothing to get their power back. And if they are successful, they intend to keep it. Members, as we approach the birthday of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I would like to remind you of the fierce urgency of now. Nearly 1 year ago, my organization released the Black Agenda 2020, a legislative roadmap to make Black Lives Matter from City Hall to Congress. The Black Agenda is informed by the Black Census Project, the largest survey of Black people in America in 156 years, conducted by my organization, the Black Futures Lab. The Black Agenda identified 6 key pillars needed to bring America closer to its promise. We call on this body to make haste in making Black communities powerful in our society by rejecting the toxic culture of white nationalism, by calling it out at every opportunity and in front of every audience. We need Congress to require data collection and regular reporting on white nationalist domestic terrorism in America so that we can dedicate adequate resources to addressing the problem. We need to better understand what efforts are being made to curb white nationalist violence. And in particular, we need to not only understand, but aggressively root out white nationalist and white supremacist actors in law enforcement agencies. Under this president specifically, but under the Republican agenda generally, oversight and accountability for civil rights has been effectively gutted. We call on this body to strengthen the Office of Civil Rights by requiring greater transparency, data collection, and reporting on their work to protect the civil rights of marginalized communities in America, and their work to hold to account those who would act to violate the civil rights of Americans through violence, intimidation, surveillance, and suppression. We also call on this body to refuse and reject any efforts to enact laws that do not address the specificity of white nationalist violence, and instead catch in their dragnet those people like myself who work tirelessly every single day to ensure the presence of a democracy and the promise of an America for all of us. Honorable members, earlier this year, my home was visited by the FBI, informing me that my name had been found written on an envelope alongside the names of elected officials and other activists in the home of a known white supremacist. Just as they had a duty to warn me of this potential threat, it is my duty to implore this body not to waste the opportunity to be the architects of a new America by enacting piecemeal and symbolic solutions to complex problems. We cannot afford symbolic measures that address that which threatens the lives of people like me, like you, every single day. Our job together is to undo the rules that have been rigged against our communities, replacing them with new rules that allow us to achieve the beloved community that we long for. We must stay focused on the task at hand and not be distracted by opportunities to be at the table when we have the opportunity to set the menu. If we are to lift every voice with substance and not just in symbol, we must ensure that we destroy the shackles that keep so many of us from rising, and the weapon of white supremacy that intends to keep us from living with dignity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for speaking truth to power. Congresswoman Maxine Waters. We need to unmute you, Congresswoman Waters.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joyce Beatty, our newly elected chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I thank you for immediately taking leadership and organizing this very important meeting based on our recent experience with the invasion of the Capitol of the United States by right-wing domestic terrorist organizations. I would like to share with you that what Al Sharpton had to say to you and what he was advising you of was extraordinarily important because in the final analysis, our security has not been attended to by us. We have left our security in the hands of those who are absolutely supposed to be in charge of security for the Capitol and all of us. But I, as an African-American woman, member of Congress, have been basically targeted so many times to be killed and have gone to the Capitol Police and to the Sergeant at Arms, and I had to force a meeting with Benny Thompson to try and make them provide not only security for me, but for others and other women of color in the caucus and in the Congress because our lives were being threatened. And so, with the knowledge that there was going to be a so-called protest movement, where the Capitol was going to be the target, I came to our Democratic caucus and I said, I think we should pay attention to the security arrangements. What do we know about what the Capitol Police are doing? What do we know about what the chief of police is doing? What do we know about the overall security organizing that is going to be desperately needed? Zoe Lofgren, who is head of our House Chair Administrative Committee, had the Capitol Chief of Police call me. And he called me, and I spent 1 hour on the telephone with him. And I asked him every question that I could think of based on what I knew about security arrangements. I started out by asking him whether or not our plaza was going to be secured and whether or not the so-called protesters would have access to that area surrounding our Capitol. He assured me that they would not be on the plaza. He assured me that it would be barricaded. He assured me that I had nothing to worry about. And then I asked him about the grassy area adjacent to the plaza and what if there were going to be opposing groups that would be there. He said, don't worry about that. We will have Capitol Police that will be stationed throughout all of those who are on the grassy area to ensure that if any confrontation takes place, they will be able to break it up. I asked him to give me the outline of the perimeter that was going to be established to keep away those who would be causing trouble. He did not do that. He basically started to tell me about the permitting process, which really must be scrutinized, really must be taken apart, really must be dealt with in the way that Reverend Sharpton talked about. I won't go into detail about how he told me that operates, but I asked him if he was going to block off Independence Avenue because of an incident that took place once when the so-called protesters were there opposing us on Obamacare, and Black Caucus members walked toward the Clinton building and some were spit upon. And so he said, well, I just want the members to use the underground tunnels and to not cross the street, be out where they can be identified. Okay, that was satisfactory. But I asked him about the Metropolitan Police, if he had the cooperation with them. He said, absolutely, they had the cooperation with them. And then I asked him if he absolutely knew the domestic terrorist groups who were well identified, and I pointed out to him that the Proud Boys were in town because that was public information. And he said to me that in the permitting process, that people did not have to identify the group. The individual who was requiring the permit would be sufficient to get a permit. And he went on to explain how that operated. That gave me some real pause and the opportunity to reflect on what I thought was missing there. But then my final kind of question for him was whether or not he was going to have police on top of our buildings, on top of the Capitol, because that's where, would-be assassins would work from. And I reminded him of Dr. Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and how they had been assassinated from high buildings, etc. He said to me, Ms. Waters, they can't get on the buildings. They would have to go through the Capitol in order to get to the top of the Capitol building. That won't happen. And so this long 1 hour conversation that I had him, he assured me that he was in charge, that he understood everything that was possible, and that they were organized in such a way there would be security. In the final analysis, this police chief either lied, he was incompetent, or he was complicit. And so now that I'm learning that he was alerted by the FBI and about police organizations from New York, that he was lying. And so I'm going to stay on this investigation. I'm going to be right in his face. I'm going to make sure that this information is shared because, ladies and gentlemen, it is not simply about the Capitol. It is about our communities. These are right-wing domestic terrorists who we are targeted by, and they intend to have power with this president even after he is no longer the president. This president is headed toward a civil war, and we're the object of their hate. And so it is not only about protection and security for the Capitol and us. We need to talk about what we're going to do to force diversity and inclusion and protection for our communities. And with that, I know Joyce is signaling that it's time to get off of here, and I'm off. I got to go to the floor and testify on impeachment. I know something about impeachment. I've been calling for it since this president was elected. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, and that's my Madam chairperson, so I give you that extra privilege. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressman Benny Thompson for 5 minutes.